A very warm greetings to one and all present in the meeting, and to our esteemed guests, and to all my climate warriors, or those just here for the free Zoom time. This side is Bhumika, and I welcome you all to the Global Series Part 1. You are about to witness a collaboration so groundbreaking that even the Earth itself is probably like, finally, someone is paying attention. We are pleased to present a collaborative event brought to you by three distinguished organizations. First, we have Climate Cadets Collective, that's CQ, which is a part of the United Nations Academic Impact Project under the Millennium Fellowship, that is particularly originated from the Lady Shri Ram College students, and it is completely supported by the institutions such as Columbia University. And it particularly focuses on grassroots climate action and resilience, that is building in vulnerable communities. Next, we are joined by Panius Youth, a platform that is particularly dedicated to engaging South Asian youth in socio-economic and cultural discussions. They are actively shaping our future through their dynamic, forward-thinking approach. And finally, we welcome Diplomacia from IITM, renowned for their expertise in public speaking. They excel at making complex topics such as economic pathways to climate resilience accessible and engaging. Together, these organizations represent a very strong partnership that is particularly dedicated to exploring the intersection of economics and climate resilience. This event will provide you valuable insights into how financial strategies can contribute to a sustainable future. In fact, by the end of this discussion and this whole session, you might just find yourself discussing policy frameworks and carbon credits with the same enthusiasm that you usually reserve for your Netflix series. And it's kind of conversation that might just make you think, wow, economics can save the planet. So get ready for an evening filled with insights and discourses and maybe even a few light-hearted moments. Because there's one thing we know, it's that solving global issues doesn't mean we can't enjoy the process. Let's dive in. Over to Vishal.
Thank you, Bhumika. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an incredible honor to welcome among us our first speaker in this series, Dr. Lekha S Chakraborty. Speaking on the agenda, Economic Pathways to Climate Resilience. Ma'am is a distinguished economist and a professor currently serving as the professor and chair at NIPFP NET, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. She is also a research associate at the Levy Economic Institute of Bard College, New York. Dr. Chakraborty has made significant contribution to the fields of public finance, gender budgeting, and climate economics. Her research on climate financing and sustainable development has been instrumental in shaping economic pathways to climate resilience. It is with absolute pleasure that I now hand over the floor to Dr. Lekha. Ma'am, please.
Thank you. Vishal, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. Thank you, Vaishnavi, Vishal, and Bhumika for this great initiative, and congratulations. And thank you so much for inviting me to be the first speaker. Bandwidth issues. Can I switch the camera for some time? Switch off?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. No issues.
Okay, so it's a brilliant initiative, and thank you so much for inviting me to be the first speaker in the series. It's my privilege and honor, and all the best for this endeavor. And to begin with, we are going to speak today about the public policy initiatives in India and abroad related to the climate change crisis. And you know that in November, we are awaiting the election results in US, and you know that the agenda will be GDP or it will be beyond GDP based on the outcome of these elections in US. And we already heard that Trump doesn't believe in climate crisis. For him, climate crisis is not real. So we need to look forward to the election outcomes in US to understand how they are going to pitch this. But the global community is moving ahead, and we have a lot of commitments in terms of we are signatory to the international commitment and we are taking it ahead. But overnight, moving towards a non-fossil fuel regime is going to be very tough, because in the high table deliberations, what India is looking forward is to how to tackle the energy crisis. For us, we cannot go overnight to a non-fossil fuel regime because it will affect us because of this energy poverty. Now, what are the major institutions in India, like RBI and the North Block and the subnational government's Ministry of Finance and the sectoral ministries are doing about it? Let's unpack that first. What's a received wisdom and what is a received public policy narratives? Let's begin with the center bank. RBI, they are in the path of greening the monetary policy, but in a sense, they are doing it from the liquidity guidance. We have the priority sector lending, right? Within the priority sector lending, a portion of the initiatives or the credit is linked to the climate change related infrastructure. So that's the way RBI is pitching. But how the cross country initiatives related to the climate change? If you take a look into the European Union, in the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde is very much focusing on greening of monetary policy by initiating green stress test for the top investors. And Bank of England is also equally bullheaded about it. And we can see that, on one hand, Rekram Rajan and many economists do not believe in greening of monetary policy because they have cautioned the central bank chiefs and the governors that if you move ahead into this climate change narrative, it's going to be very political, and the political economy narrative can be better addressed through the fiscal policies, not the monetary policies. In the sense, we don't have enough public policy tools related to the monetary policy regime to tackle this climate crisis. So on one hand, there are many economists who do not believe in going beyond the price stability when it comes to the monetary policy narrative. But on the other hand, if there is climate related risk and uncertainties, it will in turn impact your financial stability. So, in that way, taking a look into the climate related risk and uncertainty is very crucial when we talk about the financial instabilities. You know that we live in the era of polycrisis. Polycrisis in the sense, multiple crises. We have geopolitical uncertainties, we have war, we have energy crisis, we have climate crisis, we have mounting global inflation, and you name it, the supply chain disruptions. So, against the backdrop of this poly crisis, we need both monetary policy and fiscal policy to be in coordination to talk about this climate change initiatives. So when central bank is little shy about greening of monetary policy, the heavy lifting needs to be done by the fiscal policy authorities. And the fiscal policy authorities, mainly they are doing the climate resilient or the climate responsive budgeting. That is, we have national adaptation communication in India. And national adaptation communication, as a part of that, there was a steering committee in which I worked with the Ministry of Environment. And we at NIPFP, we are asked to map, or we are asked to, come with a figure that how much India is spending on adaptation. So as a part of the national adaptation communication, India has produced that number. We were given the 8 components related to the adaptation, communication, and mapping that. We have to translate this climate commitments into budgetary commitments. While mapping that, we got approximately 5% of GDP India spent on the climate change commitments. But how to take this ahead? The financing of the climate change is very crucial. So on one hand, we know that only 5% India is spending at the center government level. The state governments need to do this initiative or this exercise equally. And we are waiting for the numbers to come from the state governments. And only Bihar, Orissa and Kerala are moving ahead with climate responsive budgeting. The rest of the state governments, they are in, we have to wait for their statements. Now, if the external financing is so crucial related to the climate change commitments, the political economy of the narrations in the COP meetings, the COP meetings, is very crucial. So there's a political economy over there that we need to find finance for, this climate change commitments. How to go about that? One way, climate responsive bonds or the green bonds, that's a crucial instrument we require to tackle the energy crisis or the climate crisis. And a few years back, in the union government, Sri Nirmala Sitharaman announced that the green bonds, India is going ahead with green bonds, but that is related to the financing of the deficit in the internally. In the sense, the domestic bond financing, a portion, a thematic financing was related to the climate bonds or the green infrastructure. That's okay. But the moment we open that and do this green financing or the climate bonds with the external bond financing, then, the things are entirely different. That can lead to a lot of crisis, if you're doing it at the external level. You have seen what has happened in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Because if you look at the financing pattern of deficit, it's a significant portion of the financing of the deficit is external. So if you are asking the external financing of the deficit, a portion needs to be tied to the climate bond financing, that fluctuations or that volatility will affect your climate financing as well. Now coming to the internal, over the years in India, we moved from the seigniorage financing or monetized deficit, the monetization of the deficits, towards bond financing. Monetization of the deficit in the sense you print money or through the treasury bills, you are financing your deficit. So over the years, we have controlled that and moved towards bond financing. And now within the bond financing, a thematic financing, that is this green bond, which is, that the thematic financing will be linked to, the green infrastructure. That's okay. But there are many schools of thought. On one hand, MMT, the modern monetary theorists, they even argue that go for increasing the monetization of the deficits, but you can earmark it for certain purposes, like employer of last resort. If the government wants to go ahead as an employer of last resort, or for the green financing, you can thematically do it if you do the seigniorage financing. But it is an open discussion. We need to take a look into that financing pattern of deficit and the climate commitments. But over the years, it is, what is only relevant right now related to the internal climate financing was the green bonds. That's a major, chunk of the narrative. The other way, we need to look into the climate responsive budgeting. And the climate responsive budgeting doesn't stop at the national level. The subnational governments also need to look into that. And in addition to the monetary policy, climate responsive budgeting, and green bonds, what we need to articulate is the context of environmental federalism. Because we cannot talk about the climate change commitments if you don't talk about the fiscal federalism. Now we have 16th Finance Commission on board. You know that for the first time ever around the world, globally, India is a country, which designed ecological fiscal transfers. What exactly is ecological fiscal transfers? In the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanism, a criteria related to the climate was incorporated, and that was very crucial. And from 14th Finance Commission onwards, we have a criteria related to the climate, change. We have proxied it with a net forest scar, but climate change, if you want a proxy that is beyond forest, we know that, but due to the data constraints, they have started with the net forest scar. We need to take this criteria to the other dimensions of the climate change as well. 15th Finance Commission retained it. And so what will happen to the 16th Finance Commission, whether they will retain this criteria or they will come up with the new criteria, we need to wait and see. And when we talk about integrating climate change within the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, there are two schools of thought. One, integrate a very simple and practical measure of climate change. and that is related to the forest we have incorporated. If you want to replace that forest criteria with another thing, you need to look into the data constraints first. When you have high frequency data, you can take the data and incorporate the another criteria into the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And the second way is to do a composite index. Composite index in the sense, you can take 3, 4 dimensions of climate change. You can compute a composite index, and you can normalize it, and maybe arithmetic mean or geometric mean, that is giving equal weightage to all the components you have selected, and you have to construct a composite index, and that need to be integrated into the intergovernmental fiscal transfer framework or the finance commission transfers. But we need to know the political economy as well. Political economy in the sense, the bureaucrats, the policymakers, or the finance commission, they only entertain what is plausible, simple, and practical. So announcing a composite index from the academicians will be very tough for them. They won't entertain that. So what could be the simple criteria to proxy the climate change concerns? That is what we need to look into. And in NIPFP, we have a paper. We looked into the environmental Kuznets curve. In the sense, there is a non-linear quadratic relationship between the environmental quality and the economic growth. So we have integrated the fiscal federal variables into that equation to understand how this environmental Kuznets curve work. And in that paper, I can share that with Vaishnavi. She will give it to you. And in that paper, we understood that the fiscal federal variables are very important. They are significant determinants when it comes to the environmental quality. That's very crucial. And take a look into this environmental federalism literature. Most of the literature, you can see that it's about the tax war and race to bottom. In the sense, your capital is mobile. In order to attract the mobile capital, you enter into tax wars to attract the mobile capital. And this race to the bottom, it's always at the cost of environment. You don't have any standards related to the, greening of the economy. So it's always a question of ecology versus economy. So this race to the bottom was an important concern because of this tax war. Otherwise, you have to introduce another tax like carbon tax, or the green tax, and that's another plausibility. But the political will is very crucial here. And do you think that in the next elections or in the ongoing government, will they take up this climate financing or the climate change as a priority of the government? Or will there be any parties which will be formed on the basis of the greening of the policies? We have this in Scandinavian countries, in Germany, we have green parties. But if you look into the, if you unpack the political parties in India, we don't have any green party. Or in that sense, fiscal austerity was the basis of the party formation in Greece. That's a Syriza party. So it can be different, teams to form a party. But, I don't think that in the near future, we will see a green party in the making. Otherwise, youngsters like you should come forward, like the way it happened in Greece, like young journalists, professors, mavericks, artists, they came up against the fiscal austerity and they formed a party and, they got the landslide victory, So we need to wait and see the political will. But the existing, if you look into the status quo, what the existing political parties are doing about the climate change, we have seen that articulation only in the high table when we have the COP28 and 29, summits which is happening. And there, the important debate happened was related to the energy intensity. Energy intensity in the sense the Western world, their energy intensity is relatively higher than what's happening in the developing world. So if that's the case, asking us to go non-fossil fuel overnight will lead us to more, it will put us into a more problematic scenario. So we need to play this very safe. And another way is to look into the fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation in the sense, we have a cap on fiscal deficit in India. At the subnational government level, that is 3.5%. Earlier, Maastricht Treaty, articulated that 3% of the GDP should be the fiscal deficit. And in India, it was 3%, but recently it became 3.5% for the subnational governments. And this zero point 0.5 extra borrowing power is related to the power sector reforms in India. And power sector reforms is very crucial when we talk about the climate change commitments. And we have seen that over and over there was moral hazard, and over taxpayers' money was used for the recapitalization of the power sector. We have seen the non-SLR bond floated with state guarantee to clean up the mess that has happened with the distribution companies. So the story is divided in case of power sector. We have generated enough power in the context of India, which can give 100% electrification of villages. But when it comes to the distribution companies, they are in mess. So the story is, it's like a dual story when it comes to the power sector. So power sector reforms, that structural reforms, that's very crucial when we talk about the climate change commitments. And it is closely tied to the fiscal consolidation. And in the sense, fiscal transition and energy transition, it's moving together. So we cannot uncorrelate the fiscal transition and energy transition. So we need to take a call related to this. And if our criteria is to reach 3.5% of deficit, and we need to pitch this against the backdrop of the climate change commitments as well. So it's already 5:30. So I stop here and take questions, and then we can do the next half an
Hello,
hour
hello,
interactive.
hello,
That's okay?
hello, hello.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It is okay. Kava, can
yeah.
you
No,
continue?
ma'am, no, ma'am, no, ma'am.
Nishant, tell me. So you want me to speak a little more, and then we will open the floor. That's why you said no. What? Or I'm open to your questions. Go ahead with questions. Is it okay, Nishant? Vaishnavi?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I think that might be something. Thank you so much for the brief introduction and brief talk on this climate, ma'am. I had a few questions that I wanted to put forward before, but now I think I will. There's just one thing, ma'am, which is going on that today in the world, when we are talking about this climate finance, some of them are actually, there are some questions which are based on that as to what we are actually talking about that climate finance exists or comprises of. Is it like, do commercial transactions qualify as climate finance? And like what do you think is the basic structure of it, where everything is, we can take everything in the terms of climate financing, or is there some particular criteria where we are going forward with the same?
Very good. Vaishnavi, thank you for that question. We have thematic financing if you look globally. We have sustainable development goals, right? So in Argentina, the thematic financing of deficit happened in terms of the gender bonds. So they have created a thematic bond financing for gender equality commitments. But in India, we have done green bonds for the green financing commitments. So there are, global initiatives both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. In the private sector, especially in the mining sector, what's happening is that this extractive sector that create lot of inequality in the economy, and if there is a state business relations, if that go crony, we had it. So we need to take a look into the natural resource taxation and the industries, especially the extractive sector and the mining sector, how they pitch this initiative. So on one side, if you look in the case of India, just like the cashing in on oil, we have district mineral fund. In the sense, a part of the royalty, the mining royalty, which is augmenting the state exchequer, a part of it is going into the district mineral fund, and the district mineral fund is to correct the spatial inequalities that is created due to the mining. And another example, if you look into the South Africa or in the African countries, that is cashing in on oil. So, cashing in on oil is in the sense like a part of the oil revenue is, earmarked for tackling the human development concerns. So the coping up mechanisms around the world that needs to be tackled both from the public sector and the private sector, and CSR that is closely correlated to that. And in the mining sector, we have seen recently that there was an announcement that the major minerals that states can get into. Otherwise, the major minerals, the royalty decisions are all taken by the center government, and the royalty is collected by the state government. So I'm doing a paper right now on related to these important changes that is happening in the mineral sector. But again, when it comes to the 16th Finance Commission, we don't have any clear articulation about how they incorporate the natural resource taxation and the climate change commitments within the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. So we need to wait and see. So these were the quick public and private sector, green related initiatives which came to my mind when you asked that question. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is it possible for you to turn on your video right now, ma'am?
Oh, yeah. Okay, just one moment.
Thank you, ma'am. So I think the other question that I had was, as you have been talking about environmental federalism, and the initiative that the example you gave us from Greece, another whole party, as we say that of course the political intentions of the leaders are always coming in between when it comes to green taxonomies, pricing, and more such stuffs. So, would you give us some insights as to what exactly constitutes this environmental federalism, and more on these green taxonomies, the role being played that can be played by these taxes and carbon funds?
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. Your request for my cam, I will do that, because right now on my screen it's only you. Then I can see a red bar. If I press that, I will leave the meeting. So give me some more time. I will work it out. Now the question related to that political will. That's what you have asked me. If you ask me about the political will, I don't think that there will be a beyond GDP paradigm or a policy narrative in India in the near future. Because there can be a climate resilient economic growth that can happen, because the narrative that came from the prime minister recently was like by 2047 we will be a high income development country. So the graduation dreams of India is to go to the next level of GDP. But the question you are asking is the political will to go beyond GDP. So that question, it's a $1 million question. So whether India will entertain that in the near future, I don't know. But we can say that this GDP should be climate resilient GDP. That's the only articulation we can do. But beyond GDP, focusing on climate, that kind of concerns will India put forward. We have to wait and see. And I don't think that will happen in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll take questions now. All right, we have
Yeah,
Chavi. Can you please
Vaishnavi.
start? Yes,
Vaishnavi,
ma'am.
you asked me about the environmental federalism. I
Yes,
forgot to answer that. Sorry. Environmental federalism, we have three standard setting functions. In that three standard setting functions, the first function is closely correlated to climate change as an international public good, because it's an international commitment. We have, been the signatory of many international commitments. So we need to pitch this climate change as an international public good. Second, this climate change is closely correlated to interjurisdictional spillover effects. In the sense, a handy example is what's happening in Delhi related to air pollution. Every month, the reason for air pollution differs. But in winter, in November, December, the burning of the stuffs that lead to, this climate change issues, poor air. So that is like two governments need to come together and speak about it. How do you tackle these interjurisdictional spillover effects, the negative externalities? So that is a second standard setting function which we need to work into. Third, take climate change as a local public good. Many of the things we need to tackle at the local level. that is a principle of subsidiarity. What is principle of subsidiarity? Take the decisions at the level closest to the people. So that is principle of subsidiarity. So using the principle of subsidiarity, many functions are taken at the level closest to the people. So you need to take a call. And Nishant, the moment I spoke about climate change as a local public good, he said 3 no's. So I don't know whether he wants it to be pitched at the level that climate change is an international public good. But different scholars look into these issues from different standard setting functions. And you can read more about these standard setting functions and environmental federalism literature by taking a look into Wallace Oates. You can see the literature. I can give it to Vaishnavi. Vaishnavi can, share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll go with one question here by Chavi, Bhumika, followed by Vishal. Then we'll take up the questions which are there on chat box as well.
Definitely.
So Chavi, you may go ahead with your question, and yeah, you can turn on. Chavi, are you there?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Am I supposed to write the question in chat box?
No, you can ask.
you can speak.
Yeah. Thank you, Vaishnavi. Yeah, she can ask.
Actually, the topic is about the economic pathways to climate resilience, right? So,
No, no, no. This is not time.
excuse me. So what
Chavi,
does
you go ahead. Yes.
so what does this
No,
mean
no, no, no,
exactly?
no, no.
Okay, Chavi, I understand your question. Like, what are the economic pathways to the climate resilience? That's exactly what I have spoken about. I hope you have listened to that. And I'm listening to this no, 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 again and again. Please, mute yourself. It is very irritating. Now, Shavi,
Ma'am, I have a doubt. I have a doubt.
wait a minute. I am answering Shavi's question,
I have a
right?
doubt. I have a doubt.
Yeah, please wait. Let me take Shavi's question.
No, ma'am.
Shavi, your question was economic pathways to the climate resilience. And economic pathways means we need to look into the monetary policy, we need to look into the fiscal policy, we need to look into the trade policy. And I have spoken in detail the pathways in India, what we have taken related to the climate change commitments by RBI and the fiscal policy. And RBI, the crucial concern was how to do a greening of monetary policy. And in the monetary policy, if you look into the public banks, you know that we have the SLR commitments, then we have the bond financing, and finally we have the prime price sector lending. And in the priority sector lending, we have incorporated the climate change concerns. But within the bond financing, what government has done is the climate bonds or the thematic green financing is done. And within the SLR, we can't do anything because that's a standard. SLR, we cannot do anything because it's a part of, the liquid, it's part of their assets they need to keep with the center bank. We cannot do anything about that. Now, coming to the fiscal policy, national and subnational governments have started, what is a pathway? The first was the national climate action plan. And now this, to translate the national climate action plan, we should have budgetary commitments. So how to translate this national climate action plans, the pathways into budgetary commitments? We have started looking into the climate responsive budgeting. So that's what I was explaining to you. At the center level, we had the national adaptation communication. Now, the another pathway is to look into what holds our nation together. It is institutions, right? So Finance Commission as an institution is very crucial to look into the climate change commitments. So if you ask me the economic pathways, in addition to the monetary and the fiscal policy, we also need to take a look into the transfers, the tax transfers. So that is why I talked about the ecological fiscal transfers. Now, the fourth is about your trade. In the trade, there is a confusion that is there any retreat from globalization? But so far, in the international forums, our Prime Minister have committed that there is no retreat from the globalization. And the protectionist wave, that is very transitory. and we are committed to the global goals. Go ahead. Thank you so much, Shabi.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So there is a question on chat. We'll go with that and then we'll take it to another hand raise.
Sure.
This is a question from which says you have been only talking about the climate financing and part of government. What about the private sector? So I hope, ma'am, if you could just shed some light over the involvement of private sector in this climate financing and the all resilience structure that we want.
Absolutely. Private sector, the major role is a CSR. And how do you deal with this carbon taxes?
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, and how do you deal with the carbon taxes? And these are the two important ways in which you can think about the private sector commitments. But we need to know that the political will of a government to design a carbon tax or a green tax for the private sector, we need to wait and see, because that is not an easy thing. Okay, and before GST regime, we had a carbon cess. We call it as carbon tax. That's a part of what do you call the import and the production of coal. A part of that royalty we called as carbon tax, but after the GST, it got subsumed into the GST. So earlier there was a carbon tax based on the royalty, a portion of royalty from the tax on the coal. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Vishal, you may go ahead with your question.
Ma'am, about the carbon tax which you were talking about, my question is that like any kind of tax which I believe is like siphoning money into the hands of the government and bureaucrats, right? It doesn't anyway contribute to the environment. So how do we deal with private sector in that context? Because we can't just rely on the taxing regime to we can't really trust the tax regime, if I can speak in another way.
Okay.
And another question, ma'am. Ma'am, about the population problem which we're talking about, population, sorry, Green Party which we were talking about in Greece. In India, where hills are flattened to build houses, do you think that the concept of green parties will be relevant in India? Thank you.
Good questions. Vishal, what's your background?
Ma'am, I have a major in physics.
Wonderful. From Delhi University?
No, ma'am, I'm from Northeast Guwahati.
Wow, wonderful. So your first question, I was working with this Tata Steel and Sterlite Vedanta, a few years back. They asked the same question. They were very concerned. Like government was increasing the tax rate. So just like the way you mentioned, like if there is no link between the tax rate, we call it as Vixilian connection, okay? The connection between the tax you pay and the benefit you get. So this Vixilian connection breaks in the context of India. So Tata Steel was concerned about, this rising in every 3 years, the royalty or the mining royalty, that tax rate, that is increased. There is a Laffer curve. Like if you increase beyond a point, you won't get more revenue, more tax revenue. So they were very concerned. So he asked me a question, just like you, what is the impact of the tax policy on the firm level? Now, with the climate change commitments, in addition to this increasing the royalties, we are also asked to call upon this private sector to pay a portion for the district mineral fund. And now when the green tax come, we have to pay the green tax as well. So the concern is about multiplicity of taxes, but at the same time, it is affecting the competitiveness of the sector. So if you engage in the multiplicity of the taxation or the taxes, that will definitely affect the competitiveness of the sector. So if you are increasing the taxes to augment your revenue, then you are not going to get it. Laffer curve will operate in the sense, you won't get more revenue if you increase the taxes. Now, what is the solution? When I was working with Vedanta, their concern was that value chain needs to be incorporated when a country designed their taxation policy related to the mining sector. In the sense, in India, the royalty is paid at the run of mine ore. When you extract the ore, you have to pay or you have to pitch the royalty at the ore. But in the value chain, when ore becomes concentrate and the concentrate become mineral, a lot of exhaustion happen in the smelting process and all. So you are pitching the tax at the run of mine ore. So how to correct this? This was the second question asked, and their demand was to get into this value chain and pitch the taxation at the final stage, not at the ore. So these are the concerns. Now, Western Australia, we have wonderful models related to the mining in the private sector in Western Australia. There are three regimes. One is profit-based mining taxation. Second is unit-based mining taxation. The third, as I mentioned, we have ad valorem taxes. Ad valorem taxes means it's market linked. Then the Tata Steel asked the question: if the mining taxation is ad valorem, why you are increasing tax rate every 3 years? You're getting the question. It is already market linked. So you're getting the revenue. Why then you are revising the tax rates every 3 years? Because you decide tax rate and tax base. Tax base is ad valorem. It is market linked. Then why are you changing the tax rate? So these questions are real and we are grappling with and trying to find the solution. But industrial sector, the mining sector, private sector, they are not happy the moment we say that they need to engage into a green tax, and you have to pay, the polluter should pay principle when you adopt. So these are concerns, but government has not yet announced so far related to this strict green tax policies in India so far. And your second question, what was it? Remind me, Vishal.
Ma'am, about the green parties, the green parties of Greece, is that system relevant in India? Because
Oh,
in
yeah,
India,
yeah, yeah.
the
Sure,
population
sure.
problem.
Oh, sure. I got your question. Like I mentioned about the Syriza party in Greece, and there are many green parties. So you're asking me whether the political party, whether we will have a green party. But if you ask me the relevance, of course it's relevant because we are seeing sea rise, the blue economy. There is a crisis, and we have seen what's happening to the melting of glaciers. So if you ask me, there is definitely a case for a green party. But we don't know the calculus of consent. Okay, you think, your friends. If you and me, we are making a green party, do you think that your friends will vote for us? What will be the calculus of consent when they come for voting? Voting models say that they can vote in retrospect based on the government's policies. They, vote based on the probability of their candidate winning the election and the benefits they are going to get. And some people vote because it's a civic duty or a responsibility of the rights. So, do you think that in India people will come forward and vote for a green party? That calculus of consent we need to study very well, and it is going to be a tough call, and we need to have that real data analysis. What exactly determines the calculus of consent? If you ask me, is it relevant? Of course, it's relevant for me. What do you say, Vishal? A counter question.
I don't really think, because if you take into consideration, people here are willing to fight for land, and the taxation which the present government it has today in place. Well, actually, I don't know much of economics, but I know the price of goods, the way the prices of goods and services are increasing. On top of that, if you ask the government that we will work for environment and you have to pay 15% extra taxes on stuff, the guys will be like, no, please, we are not going to vote for you. So
Absolutely.
I
That's a
think that's
calculus of consent. But the thing is that, the climate change is real. After a certain point of time, if you don't give importance to the climate change concerns, but you're right,
Mhm.
like may not be by forming a party, but the, governments, if they don't put enough adequate attention to the climate change crisis, that's going to hit us because we have seen, we do the mitigation, that's not significant. So that's a matter of
Mhm.
concern. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can do
Thank
one
you
on
so
one
much.
later. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think we'll take one question from chat now. So there's this question put forward by Sumit Dahal, who is joining us from Nepal. And particularly, ma'am, I have this question. When I recently visited there, I saw they're actually using those old and conventional forms of energy for the transportation and everything. So there's this question that he put forward that I want to know, what about the company that fabricates vessels that emit carbon, like vehicles that consume petroleum products, or they should be more responsible for carbon taxes and carbon trade, and like what these very developing nations can do, and nations like Nepal, which are facing such critical crisis when it comes to uh, even transforming their emissions in very cleaner fuels like CNG. They are using petroleum and old products right now as well. So the global concerns and global efforts that can be done towards these nations.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. So our meeting is a global meeting. We have participants outside India as well. So that's a good news. And you're right. The question related to an emerging economy like Nepal, how they can do this, that question, how to take it ahead. Of course, a circular economy. The research related to the circular economy is now happening, and how to translate this research into public policy is a major question. And I know that in Nepal, they have climate responsive budgeting, and they do it on the basis of the tagging of public expenditure. They have a public expenditure tagging. They do the public expenditure and institutional review. So that's a good news from the fiscal policy side. So it's all very nuanced and it is very new. So how they are going to take this as a political economic question, that depends on the internal political will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think Neelam has a question to ask. If she can turn on her mic. One second, I'll allow you. Yes. Neelam, you can go onwards with your question.
अनारकली को पीछे क्यों चुनवाया?
Understood. Mansha, you may go ahead with your question. Mansha? Okay, Reha.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. Thank you so much for that.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Reha. Now you can turn on.
Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you
Okay.
are.
Thank you so much for that insightful talk, Professor. I was going back to something that you said in the initial part of the session, where you mentioned that India is also attempting to pull itself out of energy poverty. And I was just thinking that with the current focus on India being an increasing global superpower and a certain foreign policy plus private sector focus on infrastructure and industrial development, how can we tune public policy or advocate for climate resilient strategies to pull India out of energy poverty while also ensuring that it develops or strengthens its industrial capacity? Like, how do we bridge that gap or maintain that balance?
Thank you. Reha, energy poverty, that's a real concern. When we talk about this energy poverty, you can understand that the significant dependence of India on the fossil fuel. So it is not plausible for us to go non-fossil fuel quickly. So that is what I mentioned as energy poverty. So if you ask me, non-conventional energy sources, uh, to switch on to that era, what are the options in front of us? Solar. We have solar panels, but what will happen to solar panel at the end of a decade? That will become another huge environmental waste. Now we are asked to do electric vehicles regime, and the electric vehicles, again, this energy poverty question will arise. In an emerging country like India, the use or the utility of electricity, whether it is for the electric vehicles or whether it is for the electrification of villages, we need to take a call related to the utility of electricity. Again, I mentioned about the power sector reforms. And this power sector is in mess, and it is closely correlated to this fiscal consolidation process. And we asked the discom distribution companies to clean up their mess in terms of the financial efficiency and operational efficiency. But if you take a look into the interstate differentials, many states have not yet come up with, a clean data on the financial efficiency parameters in terms of decreasing the aggregate technical and commercial loss, decreasing the gap between the cost and the, revenue and the cost, and also getting into the tariff revisions and operational efficiency in the sense the power sector infrastructure reforms. How many states have taken about it? So this is a work in progress and miles to go. But the moment we do this energy transition, it affects the revenue requirements of the state, because we are doing a fiscal transition as well, because we will not be depending on fossil fuel based taxation or extractive sector taxation anymore. So that's a loss to the exchequer. That's why I mentioned that this tax buoyancy and this energy transition, these are closely correlated. We have taken up this question in a recent paper, and that also I can share with Vaishnavi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have so many questions. I think, Ram, if you can turn on your mic and put these questions in front of ma'am. We need to wrap up, guys. Ma'am has a flight at 6. All right. Bhumika, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, there was the Char Dham highway project in Uttarakhand that was particularly aimed at improving connectivity to all the pilgrimage sites, and it raised the particular concerns about the landslides and deforestation in that particular fragile Himalayan ecosystem. So my question is, how can India ensure that religious or tourism infrastructure development in such sensitive regions doesn't aggravate climate vulnerabilities and instead of enhancing the local climate resilience?
Oh, yeah, you said it. Like unscientific development, that can lead to climate crisis, and that's exactly what has happened in Uttarakhand. That unmindful constructions have led to the climate crisis, and recently, what has happened in Kerala, in Wayanad, that we have seen that it was a torrential rain, and it led to the landslides, and the tragedy happened. So, if you ask me whether using the scientific, technology and all, we can, give them a warning prior to this, of course, it is plausible. But that is only a partial way to analyze this question, because pre-warning is one thing, and making the governments and the private sector, you know, uh, make them prepared to tackle this crisis is yet another. So here, what is happening is that everything is exposed. Once the event has happened, we are getting into the remedial, or not remedial, we are getting into this climate change related measures. But lot of ex ante public policy decisions need to be taken. The mitigation, adaptation, these two components should be treated equally to prevent the future climate crisis. Of course, the climate warning systems, that's there. We have very good R&D and very good systems in India to do that. But the preparedness of the government to do ex ante the climate related policies is equally crucial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we'll go with the last question. I do understand you have 5 minutes more, ma'am, to go
Sure,
ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, so there's this very exciting question put forward by Ram in the chat. So I'm reading it out. Don't you think that the carbon tax will lead to inflation? At the end, the consumer will be the one paying, similar to what happened in Canada and their carbon tax. In USA, the presidential candidate like Trump and Viveka Ramaswamy already calling climate change a hoax, showing Canada and calls for drilling oil. Don't you think people will start voting against the climate policy once it starts costing people personally because of inflation? Would like to know your review on this, ma'am.
Oh, that's brilliant question, and this question is related to inflation. Uh, if you look at the center bank narrative, we have an inflation targeting, right? It is based on the nominal anchor we have in India, that we cannot have a CPI, this based inflation. beyond 4%. And we also have inflation expectation survey, and then we have an output gap. Output gap is, of course, the difference between the potential output and the actual output. In the context of America, it is based on the native economy, that is employment. In India, we do it on the basis of GDP. So that's a way the inflation targeting, that rules-based inflation targeting is designed in the context of India. And as I mentioned earlier, for RBI, price stability is the prime concern. It's not the climate change commitments yet. If you ask me, by mandate, the new monetary policy framework is price stability or inflation containment. Now, when it comes to the inflationary pressures, as you mentioned, from the supply shocks or from climate or whatever which is non-monetary, how are we going to deal with that? This question was asked to RBI. If the can inflation targeting handle this non-monetary phenomenon in the context of India? Because in India, inflation is not primarily monetary. Your question is real. So how do you handle this non-monetary causes or the channels of inflation? Then it is mentioned that the expectations channel will take care of these components, and the relative prices can be taken care of by inflation targeting by RBI. So your question also will be answered in affirmative if the expectations channel of the inflation targeting works in India. But we have empirical evidence that the expectations channel doesn't work. Then we need to ask the question, fiscal theory of price determination. Can we come through that way? The fiscal route to control the inflation, or that is another way. And this is a Chicago school of thought, the fiscal theory of price determination. So how to tackle? These are the two ways in which we can now look into the inflation containment. And as you said, this tax is inflationary and it needs to be tackled through the fiscal route rather than the monetary route. Because in India, as you mentioned, it is not strictly monetary, the inflation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think it's now ma'am has a flight right now. So I'll just extend a motion of thanks to ma'am. So being the president and founder for this Climate Cadets Collective, and also from the Pioneers Youth Organization, which is a South Asian organization, and the project that we're doing there at DemoLeague, which talks about the global concerns which we all are facing today. And with the upcoming COP29, I thought that this is what the global concern today is, and that's what we should all talk about. So with this, with the members of Climate Cadets Collective, IITM Diplomacia Society, and Pioneers Youth extend our heartfelt gratitude to Lekha ma'am for her invaluable contribution to our esteemed session. Despite the challenging circumstances of ma'am being at airport, ma'am graciously took the time to share her profound insights and expertise with all of us. So I'm so grateful to you, ma'am, for doing so much for us and answering all those questions very well. Thank you so much, ma'am, and we look forward to the possibility of having you again in the session.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. All the best. Thank you so much.
So everyone, I'll be sharing all the details via mail or via in the groups and the papers that ma'am referred to you all. And yes, thank you so much for joining as well. That meant a lot. Thank you. Have a safe journey, ma'am. Have a safe flight.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.